the dusty stretch of Highway 2, 20 miles from the Mexican border, baked under the merciless Arizona sun. Most drivers would have missed her, a tiny figure in a torn pink dress stumbling barefoot along the asphalt's edge like a ghost in the desert heat. But Jake Morrison wasn't most drivers. 10 years of special operations had trained him to notice what others missed. The child couldn't be more than 6 years old, her dark hair matted with blood, her eyes wide with terror that no child should ever know. As he pulled over, Jake's military instincts screamed danger. This wasn't a runaway or a lost tourist. The way she flinched at his approach, the burns on her wrists, the haunted look in her eyes, this was a survivor. "You're safe now," he whispered, extending his calloused hand to her trembling fingers. But as he lifted the girl into his truck, Jake didn't know he'd just signed their death warrants. Because Elena wasn't just any child, she was the daughter of a cartel informant, and she'd seen something that could topple an entire criminal empire. But what had this innocent little girl witnessed that made her so dangerous? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The girl's weight in his arms was disturbingly light, like carrying a broken bird. Jake's Ford Raptor hummed with air conditioning as he settled her into the passenger seat, but she remained rigid, eyes darting between him and the windows as if expecting monsters to emerge from the desert landscape. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Jake kept his voice soft, the same tone he'd used to calm frightened civilians in Kandahar. No response, just those enormous brown eyes tracking his every movement. He reached for the water bottle in his console, moving slowly. The girl's sharp intake of breath made him freeze. Her gaze had locked onto the Sig Sauer holstered beneath his left arm, barely visible through his open flannel shirt, but she'd spotted it instantly. Most 6-year-olds wouldn't recognize a concealed weapon. This child did. Jake carefully removed the holster, placing it in the glove compartment with deliberate movements. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "My name is Jake. I was a soldier, but now I help people." The half-truth rolled off his tongue easily. He couldn't exactly explain that he'd spent the last decade eliminating high-value targets across 3 continents, or that he was currently on mandatory psychiatric leave after his last mission went sideways in Syria. The girl's lips moved so quietly he almost missed it. "Papa? Where's your papa, honey?" Her face crumpled, and Jake felt something twist in his chest. He'd seen plenty of collateral damage during his deployments, but something about this child's anguish cut deeper than usual. Maybe it was the forced retirement screwing with his head, or maybe it was the way she looked at him, like he might be her last hope in the world. "Let's get you cleaned up and find your family," he said, starting the engine. As they drove toward Tucson, Jake's mind raced through possibilities. The burns on her wrists suggested restraints, zip ties, maybe rope. The blood in her hair appeared dried, indicating several hours had passed since whatever happened to her. But what concerned him most was her silence. Not selective muteness or shyness, but the calculated quiet of someone who'd learned that making noise brought pain. His secure phone buzzed. Text from his handler, "Monthly check-in overdue. Respond within 24 hours or we're sending wellness visit." Jake silenced the phone. The Navy's psychiatric evaluation could wait. Right now, this kid needed him more than his commanding officers needed to know about his sleep patterns and alcohol consumption. In the rearview mirror, a black Escalade had been maintaining the same distance for the past 5 miles. Probably nothing, but Jake's training didn't believe in coincidences. He took the next exit, watching as the SUV continued straight on the highway. Paranoia, his therapist would say. Post-traumatic stress manifesting as hypervigilance. But paranoia had kept him alive through 17 deployments. The girl had fallen asleep against the window, her breathing finally steady. In sleep, she looked like any other child, not the tiny warrior who'd somehow survived whatever hell she'd escaped. Jake found himself wondering about her story. Had she been kidnapped? Was she an illegal border crossing gone wrong? Or was this something darker? His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't his handler. unknown number, you have something that belongs to us. Return it, or everyone you've ever loved dies slowly. Jake's blood turned to ice. He glanced at the sleeping child, then at the message. No one knew he'd picked her up. No one except whoever had been watching. The black Escalade appeared in his mirrors again, closer this time. Jake pressed the accelerator, his mind shifting into combat mode. Whatever this little girl had witnessed, people were willing to kill for her silence. But they'd chosen the wrong man to threaten. They were about to learn why Jake Morrison had never failed a mission. The motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial disinfectant, but it was clean enough. Jake locked the deadbolt and engaged the chain, then pulled the thin curtains closed. The girl hadn't spoken during the 20-minute drive, just stared out the passenger window with those haunted eyes that reminded him too much of the Afghan children he'd seen in bombed-out villages. "You hungry?" he asked, setting his duffel bag on the dresser. She remained by the door, clutching the oversized jacket around her small frame. Her dark hair hung in tangles, and now that they were under fluorescent lights, he could see the dirt streaked across her cheeks and the small cuts on her bare feet. Jake pulled out his phone and called the front desk. "Yeah, this is room 12. Can you send over some food, anything kid-friendly, and maybe some basic clothes for a little girl, size, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7? He glanced at her. "And some shoes." The desk clerk sounded skeptical. "Sir, we don't really have—" "There's an extra 100 in it, if you can make it happen in the next hour. I'll see what I can do." Jake hung up and turned back to the girl. She was still standing in the same spot, watching him with a mixture of fear and calculation that no child should possess. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of survivors who'd learned that trust could get you killed. "My name's Jake," he said, keeping his voice soft and sitting on the edge of the bed to make himself less imposing. "What's yours?" "Nothing." He tried again in Spanish. "¿Cómo te llamas?" Her eyes flickered with recognition, but she remained silent. "Okay, that's fine. You don't have to talk right now." Jake pulled a water bottle from his bag and set it on the nightstand nearest to her. "But you should drink something, and when the food gets here, you should eat." She stared at the water bottle, like it might be a trap. Jake's phone buzzed with a text message. He glanced at it, another missed call notification from Sarah. His ex-wife had been trying to reach him for 3 days, probably about their son's upcoming birthday. Another conversation he wasn't ready to have, another reminder of the life he'd walked away from when the nightmares got too bad and the bottle became his best friend. He silenced the phone and focused on the immediate problem. "Look, I know you're scared," he said, "and I know you don't know me. But I'm not going to hurt you, and I'm not going to let anyone else hurt you either. That's a promise." The girl's posture shifted slightly. She was listening, even if she wouldn't respond. A knock at the door made her flinch and move further into the corner. Jake held up a hand in a calming gesture and approached the door carefully. He checked the peephole before opening it to the chain's limit. A teenage boy stood outside holding 2 plastic bags. "Food and clothes," he said. "My mom runs the gift shop next door. She sent over what she had." Jake passed him the money through the gap and took the bags. "Thanks." When he turned around, the girl had moved closer to the bathroom, ready to bolt. The fear in her eyes had intensified. "Just food," he said, showing her the bags. "See?" He pulled out a wrapped sandwich, a bag of chips, and a juice box, setting them on the small table. From the second bag came a pink t-shirt with a cartoon character, a pair of jeans that looked close to her size, and some white sneakers. "Better than what I can offer," he said, holding up the clothes. For the first time, something almost like interest crossed her face when she saw the sandwich. "When's the last time you ate?" Jake asked. She took a tentative step forward, then another. Her hunger was winning the battle against her fear, which told him she'd been on her own for a while. Jake moved back to give her space, settling into the chair by the window. "Go ahead." She approached the table like a wild animal at a watering hole, ready to run at the first sign of danger. But she grabbed the sandwich and tore into it with desperate efficiency. While she ate, Jake found himself studying her more carefully. The cuts on her feet were recent but already scabbing over. Her clothes were torn and dirty, but had been good quality once. Someone had braided her hair neatly before. Whatever had happened to her? Most troubling were the faint bruises on her wrists and the way she kept glancing at the door and windows. This wasn't just a lost child or a runaway. This was someone who'd escaped from something bad. His phone rang. The caller ID showed a Virginia area code he didn't recognize. Yeah? Mr. Torres? This is Agent Michelle Reeves, FBI. I understand you may have information about a missing child. Jake's blood went cold. He hadn't called anyone yet. So, how did the FBI know? The girl's eyes snapped open the moment Jake's boots hit the gravel outside the motel room. Even through the thin walls she had heard him coming, not the heavy, careless footsteps of most men, but the measured gait of someone who moved with purpose. She sat up on the narrow bed, clutching the oversized t-shirt he'd given her, and watched the door with the wariness of a cornered animal. Jake entered quietly, carrying 2 paper bags and a steaming cup of coffee. The smell of hot food filled the cramped room, but the girl didn't move. She studied his face with those impossibly old eyes, searching for something that might tell her whether this stranger meant safety or danger. "Brought you breakfast," he said, setting one bag on the small table by the window. "Pancakes, bacon, orange juice. Figured you might be hungry." She remained silent, but her stomach betrayed her with a low rumble. Jake pretended not to notice, unpacking his own meal with deliberate slowness. He'd learned patience in places where moving too fast could mean death, and something told him this situation required the same careful approach. "I'm Jake," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "Jake Morrison. I know you probably don't want to talk, but I need to know your name, just so I can help you." The girl's lips parted slightly, as if she might speak, then pressed together again. Her gaze drifted to the window, where morning light filtered through faded curtains. Beyond the glass, the parking lot stretched empty except for his truck and a rusted sedan that had been there since he'd arrived. Jake tried a different approach. "You know, when I was about your age, I got lost in the woods behind our house. Spent a whole night out there, scared out of my mind. My mom was frantic. When they finally found me the next morning, I wouldn't talk to anyone for hours. Sometimes when bad things happen, words just don't come easy." Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or the faintest spark of trust. She shifted on the bed, drawing her knees up to her chest. "Sophia," she whispered, the word barely audible. Jake felt a wave of relief. "Sophia, that's a beautiful name." He kept his voice gentle, non-threatening. "Can you tell me where you're from, Sophia? Where your family is?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Her face crumpled, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. She shook her head violently, rocking back and forth on the bed. "Hey, it's okay." Jake remained seated, fighting every instinct that told him to comfort her. Sudden movements would only make things worse. "You don't have to talk about that right now. You're safe here." But even as he said the words, Jake knew they weren't entirely true. This wasn't just a case of a lost child or a family emergency. The terror in Sophia's eyes, the way she'd been walking alone on that desolate highway, the careful way she positioned herself near the room's exit, everything pointed to something far more dangerous. His phone buzzed with a text message. Jake glanced at the screen and felt his blood chill. The message was from a number he didn't recognize. "We know you have her. Return what belongs to us." Jake's military training kicked in immediately. He moved to the window, staying low as he peered through a gap in the curtains. The parking lot still looked empty, but that didn't mean much. Professional hunters knew how to stay invisible. "Sophia," he said, his voice taking on a new urgency. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. We might need to leave here soon. Can you do that?" She looked up at him, tears still wet on her cheeks, and nodded. Whatever she'd survived had taught her to recognize real danger, and she could hear it now in his voice. Jake began gathering their few belongings, his mind racing through options. His truck was fast, but on the open highway they'd be exposed. The nearest town was 40 miles south, but going there might put innocent people at risk, and he still had no idea who they were running from or why Sophia was so important to them. Another text arrived 1 hour. The old gas station on Route 47, come alone or everyone dies. Jake stared at the message, weighing impossible choices. These people, whoever they were, had found them faster than should have been possible. They had resources, organization, and clearly no qualms about threats. But giving up Sophia wasn't an option, not when he could see the absolute terror in her eyes at the thought of going back. He knelt down in front of the bed, meeting Sophia's gaze directly. I want you to know something. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. I don't know what happened to you before, but it's not going to happen again. Do you understand? Sophia studied his face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. In her eyes, Jake saw the first glimmer of hope, fragile and tentative, but real. Good, he said, standing and shouldering his pack. Then let's get out of here. The safe house sat 20 miles outside El Paso, a weathered ranch property that had seen better decades. Jake pulled the truck into the gravel driveway as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows from the mesquite trees that dotted the property. The girl hadn't spoken since her whispered words at the diner, but her eyes tracked every movement, every sound. Maria Santos emerged from the front door before Jake had even cut the engine. She was exactly as he remembered, compact, fierce, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her reputation preceded her, former DEA, now running a network that helped cartel victims disappear. If anyone could help the girl, it was Maria. You look like hell, Jake. Maria's voice carried the weight of too many years fighting a losing war. Nice to see you too. He stepped out of the truck, his body protesting every movement. The adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving behind a bone-deep fatigue and the throbbing reminder of his injuries. Thanks for doing this. Maria's expression softened when she saw the girl. She approached slowly, hands visible, speaking in gentle Spanish. The child's posture remained rigid, but something flickered in her eyes, recognition maybe, or hope. What's her name? Maria asked. Don't know. She's barely said a word. Jake watched as Maria knelt down to the girl's eye level, found her on Highway 90, covered in blood that wasn't hers. Maria's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. She'd seen too many kids like this one, survivors of a war that devoured innocence without discrimination. She continued, speaking softly to the girl, who finally nodded once, then whispered something so quiet Jake couldn't catch it. Isabella, Maria translated. Her name is Isabella. The house's interior reflected its owner, functional, sparse, but somehow welcoming. Maria led them to a kitchen that smelled of coffee and chilies, gesturing for Jake to sit while she focused on Isabella. The girl accepted a glass of milk but remained standing, positioned where she could see all the exits. Smart kid, Jake thought. Survival instincts already hardwired. She needs a doctor, Maria said, noting the scratches on Isabella's arms and the way she favored her left side. And you look like you could use some patching up yourself. I'm fine. Sure you are. That's why you're bleeding through your shirt. Maria pulled out her phone. I've got someone coming. Discreet. No questions asked. While they waited, Maria worked on drawing Isabella out, offering cookies, showing her picture books in Spanish, speaking in the kind of soothing tones that suggested extensive experience with traumatized children. Gradually, the girl's rigid posture began to relax, though her eyes never stopped scanning. The doctor arrived an hour later, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and gentle hands who examined both patients with professional efficiency. Isabella submitted to the examination with the stoic resignation of someone far older than her years. She had bruises, cuts, and signs of dehydration, but nothing that wouldn't heal with time and care. Jake's injuries were more extensive than he'd admitted. The knife wound needed proper stitching, and his ribs were definitely cracked, possibly fractured. The doctor worked in silence, her expression disapproving of his obvious attempt to ignore serious injuries. She keeps asking for her papa, Maria said quietly while the doctor worked. Says bad men came to their house. Says her papa told her to run and hide. Jake winced as the needle pulled through his skin. Where? Still working on that. She's scared, confused. But Jake... Maria's voice dropped lower. She mentioned Los Serpientes. The snakes. That's Valdez territory. The needle paused in the doctor's hand. Even she recognized the name. Eduardo Valdez ran one of the most vicious cartels along the border, known for eliminating entire bloodlines to send messages. If Isabella had witnessed something involving Los Serpientes, her life expectancy could be measured in hours, not years. They'll come looking, Jake said, stating the obvious. They already are. Maria showed him her phone. My contacts say there's been chatter since last night. Someone's offering serious money for information about a missing girl. The weight of the situation settled over them like a suffocating blanket. This wasn't just about helping a lost child anymore. This was about survival. Every minute Isabella remained alive was borrowed time, and every person who helped her became a target. We need to move her again, Maria continued. Tonight. I've got people who can... No. Jake's voice was firm. They'll find her eventually. These people don't give up. So, what are you suggesting? Jake looked at Isabella, who had curled up on the couch with a worn stuffed animal Maria had produced. She looked so small, so vulnerable, yet she'd already survived more horror than most adults could imagine. She deserved better than a life spent running and hiding. We end this, he said. We find out what she saw, what she knows. Then we make sure Valdez can't use it. Maria stared at him. That's suicide. Maybe. But running just delays the inevitable. Jake flexed his newly bandaged hands. And I'm tired of running. The motel room felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus sat rigid in the chair by the window, his rifle across his knees, watching the empty parking lot through a gap in the yellowed curtains. Every shadow could hide death. Every distant sound of an engine made his finger drift toward the trigger. Sophia hadn't spoken since they'd arrived 6 hours ago. She lay curled on the bed farthest from the door, still wearing her blood-stained dress, clutching the stuffed rabbit he'd bought her from the vending machine. Her breathing was steady, but he knew she wasn't sleeping. He recognized the rhythm, the careful, controlled breathing of someone trying to disappear. His satellite phone buzzed. Marcus glanced at the screen. Tommy Castellanos, his old squad leader, now working private security in San Diego. Yeah, Marcus whispered into the phone. Jesus Christ, Marcus, what kind of hornet's nest did you kick? Tommy's voice was tight with concern. I've got contacts in DEA, Border Patrol, even some gray area folks south of the fence. Word is there's serious money on your head. We're talking 8 figures. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. What else? The girl you picked up? Her name's Sofia Delgado. Her father was Miguel Delgado. Heard of him? The name hit Marcus like a sledgehammer. Everyone who'd operated in Central America knew that name. The accountant. Not just any accountant. He managed the books for the Sinaloa cartel, the Gulf cartel, Los Zetas, all the major players. Guy was like Switzerland, completely neutral, handled everybody's money. Until 3 days ago, when someone decided neutral wasn't good enough anymore. Marcus looked at Sophia's small form on the bed. No wonder she was catatonic. She'd witnessed her entire family's execution. Who ordered the hit? That's where it gets messy. My sources say it was Hector Morales, but he's claiming it wasn't him. Says someone's trying to start a war between the cartels by framing him for killing their banker. Morales. Marcus knew the name too, a butcher who'd carved out his own territory between Tijuana and Mexicali through sheer brutality. Why would someone frame him? Could be anyone. The cartels, DEA, CIA, hell, could be the Mexican government trying to clean house. Point is, every major criminal organization south of the border wants that little girl dead, and they want whoever's protecting her dead too. They can't risk what she might have seen or heard. Marcus processed this, his tactical mind already working through implications. How much time do I have? They're mobilizing everything. Sicarios, coyotes, corrupt cops on both sides of the border. I'm hearing they've got people checking every motel, gas station, and safe house between Nogales and Los Angeles. You need to get underground, and I mean deep." A car engine rumbled in the distance. Marcus tensed, peering through the curtain. Headlights swept across the parking lot, a late-model sedan moving slowly, too slowly for someone just passing through. It paused near the motel office. "Tommy, I need an extraction route, something they won't see coming." "Already working on it. There's a guy I know, runs a charter fishing boat out of San Diego. He can get you to international waters, then north to a safe port. But you need to reach the marina by tomorrow night." "They're here," Marcus whispered. He was already moving, slinging the rifle over his shoulder and grabbing their meager supplies. "What? Marcus, get out of there. Now." Marcus ended the call and pocketed the phone. He moved to Sophia's bed and gently shook her shoulder. Her eyes opened immediately, wide, alert, terrified. "We have to go, Mija. Right now." She sat up without question, still holding the stuffed rabbit. Marcus had learned to appreciate her silence. She understood danger in ways most adults never would. The bathroom window was small, but they could fit through it. Marcus had checked it when they arrived, always have an exit strategy. He lifted Sophia onto the sink counter and pushed the window open. The alley behind the motel was dark and empty. "Climb through and wait for me," he whispered. Sophia squeezed through the opening with practiced ease. Too practiced, Marcus thought grimly. This wasn't her first time running for her life. He followed, dropping silently into the alley as voices echoed from the front of the motel. Someone was arguing with the night clerk. They had maybe 3 minutes before the men reached their room. Marcus took Sophia's hand, and they moved through the shadows between buildings, heading for their stolen pickup truck parked 2 blocks away. San Diego was still 4 hours north, and dawn was breaking over the desert. Behind them, the motel room door splintered open. The safe house sat tucked between a 24-hour laundromat and a taco shop that had seen better decades, its neon sign flickering intermittently in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus pulled the stolen pickup into the narrow alley behind the building, checking his mirrors one final time before killing the engine. The silence felt heavy after hours of highway noise. Sophia stirred in the passenger seat, her small hand still clutching the rabbit. She'd barely spoken since they'd abandoned the Camaro at a rest stop 30 miles back, switching vehicles with practiced efficiency, while she watched with those 2 knowing eyes. "We're here," Marcus said softly, scanning the fire escapes and roof lines visible from their position. Old habits died hard, and right now those habits might keep them alive. "Remember what I told you about staying close?" She nodded, sliding across the bench seat toward him. Her movements were careful, calculated, not the natural exuberance of a 6-year-old, but the learned caution of someone who'd seen what happened when you weren't careful enough. Marcus led her through the back entrance, past a narrow stairwell that reeked of cigarettes and industrial disinfectant. The key was where Elena had promised it would be, taped under the 3rd step. His contact at the DEA had come through, as she always did. Elena Vasquez had saved his ass more times than he could count during his contractor days in Central America, and she was one of the few people in law enforcement he trusted completely. The apartment was sparse but clean, a fold-out couch, kitchenette, and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. Heavy curtains blocked the windows, and Marcus kept them that way as he did a quick security sweep. No bugs that he could detect, no sight lines from neighboring buildings, one exit route through the window that led to the fire escape. "Are you hungry?" he asked, opening the small refrigerator. Elena had stocked it with basics: bread, milk, some fruit, sandwich meat. Nothing fancy, but it would do. Sophia climbed onto the couch, arranging herself in the corner with the rabbit in her lap. "They killed my mama," she said suddenly, her voice matter-of-fact in the way children deliver devastating truths. Marcus froze, a container of orange juice halfway to the counter. He'd suspected, of course, but hearing it confirmed hit him like a physical blow. He set the juice down carefully and turned to face her. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it. "Can you tell me what happened?" She was quiet for a long moment, picking at the rabbit's worn fur. When she spoke, her words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them back behind a dam that had suddenly burst. "Mama said we were going to see Tio Roberto in Phoenix. She put our clothes in a bag and said we had to leave right away, but the bad men came to our house before we could go." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They had guns, big ones." Marcus sat down on the opposite end of the couch, keeping his distance, but close enough to offer comfort if she needed it. "How did you get away?" "Mama hid me in the closet, behind her dresses. She told me not to come out no matter what I heard." Sophia's grip on the rabbit tightened. There was a lot of yelling, and then the loud noises started. Gunshots. Marcus had heard enough of them to know the sound stayed with you, especially when you were small and scared, and listening to your world end from inside a dark closet. "I stayed there for a long time," Sophia continued, "until it got quiet. Then I went to look for Mama, but—" She trailed off, and Marcus didn't push. He could imagine what she'd found. The bad men were gone, but they left one behind. He was sleeping in the kitchen, and he smelled funny. I walked past him real quiet and went outside. I walked and walked until the policeman found me. The timeline was starting to make sense. A cartel hit, probably drug-related given Roberto's involvement. They'd killed everyone they could find, posted a guard to watch the scene, and somehow missed a 6-year-old hiding in a closet. When the guard had fallen asleep, or passed out drunk more likely, Sophia had slipped away into the desert. "Sophia," Marcus said carefully, "do you know why the bad men came to your house?" She shook her head. "Mama was scared of Tio Roberto sometimes. She said he did bad things with bad people. But she never told me what kind of bad things." A knock at the door made them both freeze. 3 short raps, pause, 2 more. Elena's signal. Marcus drew his Glock anyway, motioning for Sophia to stay on the couch as he approached the door. "It's me," Elena's voice called softly. Marcus unlocked the deadbolt and let her in, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand rested near her service weapon. Elena Vasquez was a 10-year veteran of the DEA's cartel task force, and she didn't spook easily. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "A big one." The safe house smelled of stale coffee and old cigarettes, its windows covered with newspapers that filtered the morning light into grey shadows. Marcus sat at a wooden table, cleaning his sidearm while keeping one eye on Sophia, who was curled up on the couch with a coloring book Deputy Chen had brought. The normalcy of the scene felt like a lie. His phone buzzed. "Detective Rodriguez." "We've got a problem," Rodriguez said without preamble. 3 bodies turned up at a motel outside Bakersfield this morning. Professional hits, execution style. The desk clerk described 2 men asking about a soldier and a little girl. Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "How far behind us are they?" 6 hours. Maybe less. They're moving fast, and they're not being subtle about it. Local PD found shell casings from high-end weapons. These aren't street thugs, Marcus. This is cartel money paying for elite talent. Through the newspaper-covered window, Marcus caught a glimpse of movement. His training kicked in instantly, cataloging details, black SUV, tinted windows, moving too slowly for normal traffic. He moved to Sophia without seeming to hurry. "We need to move, now." Rodriguez's voice crackled through the phone. "There's something else. We ran Sophia's fingerprints through every database we could access. She doesn't exist. No birth certificate, no medical records, nothing. It's like she appeared out of thin air." Marcus scooped up Sophia, who looked at him with those dark eyes that had seen too much. "What does that mean?" "It means whoever she is, whatever she witnessed, it's bigger than we thought. The cartel doesn't burn this many resources on loose ends. She's a primary target, which means she knows something that could destroy them." The SUV had stopped across the street. Marcus could see shapes moving inside, the deliberate positioning of a surveillance team. His mind raced through tactical options, exit strategies, defensive positions. The safe house suddenly felt like a trap. Rodriguez, I need an extraction route. We're compromised. Back door leads to an alley. There's a drainage tunnel 50 yards east that connects to the storm system. It'll take you 6 blocks away from your current position. Sophia clung to his neck as Marcus gathered their few belongings. She hadn't spoken since yesterday, but her grip tightened whenever danger approached, as if her body had developed an early warning system for violence. "Donde vamos?" she whispered against his ear. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe, mija. I promise." The back door opened onto a narrow alley lined with dumpsters and fire escapes. Marcus moved in a crouch. Sophia pressed against his chest, every sense hyper-alert. The drainage tunnel Rodriguez mentioned was a concrete pipe barely wide enough for a grown man, but it represented survival. As they reached the tunnel entrance, Marcus heard the front door of the safe house explode inward, shouting in Spanish, the crash of furniture being overturned, the systematic search of professionals who knew their business. He counted at least 4 distinct voices. The tunnel was a nightmare of darkness and stagnant water, but Marcus had navigated worse. He pulled out a small flashlight, shielding the beam with his fingers, and began the crawling journey through 6 blocks of urban underground. Sophia remained silent, her trust in him absolute and terrifying. Behind them, the sounds of the search faded, replaced by the echo of their movement through the concrete pipe. Marcus's phone vibrated against his chest. A text from an unknown number. "We know who you are, Marcus Webb. We know where you served. Give us the girl and live." He deleted the message without responding. They knew his name now, which meant they had resources beyond what he'd anticipated. Military records, service history, probably his entire background. The faceless enemy was becoming personal. The tunnel ended at a storm drain in an industrial section of the city. Marcus emerged into daylight, Sophia still in his arms, and immediately began looking for transportation. A delivery truck sat outside a warehouse, engine running while the driver unloaded boxes. "Stay quiet," he whispered to Sophia. The theft was simple and necessary. Marcus slipped into the driver's seat while the delivery man was inside the warehouse. Sophia curled up on the passenger side, making herself invisible with the instinct of someone who had learned that visibility meant danger. As they drove through the city streets, Marcus's phone rang again. "Rodriguez. The safe house is gone. They torched it after the search. Whatever they're looking for, they're willing to kill anyone who might have seen it." Marcus glanced at Sophia, who was staring out the window at the passing buildings with an expression too old for her face. She carried secrets that men would murder for, knowledge that made her worth more dead than alive to people with unlimited resources and no conscience. "Where do we go now?" he asked Rodriguez. "I'm working on it. But Marcus, whoever these people are, they've got reach we didn't expect. Trust no one except me." The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with a stolen truck, a traumatized child, and the growing certainty that they were running from enemies who would never stop hunting them. The safe house sat like a forgotten memory in the Texas hill country, its weathered, clapboard siding blending seamlessly with the scrub oak and mesquite. Jake had purchased the property 3 years ago under a shell company, one of several bolt holes he'd established after leaving the teams. He'd never imagined he'd be using it to protect a traumatized child from cartel assassins. Elena hadn't spoken since they'd left the gas station 12 hours ago. She sat curled in the passenger seat of the stolen pickup truck, her small hands clutching the stuffed rabbit Jake had grabbed from a roadside diner's gift shop. Her dark eyes tracked every movement, every shadow, as if death might emerge from the Texas landscape at any moment. Jake killed the engine and studied the perimeter. The motion sensors he'd installed showed green on his phone app, no movement for the past 72 hours. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles away. If Vargas's people had found this place, they were ghosts. "We're safe here," he said softly, turning to Elena. She didn't respond, but he caught the slight tension in her shoulders. Trust would take time. Trust might be a luxury they couldn't afford. The house's interior smelled of dust and disuse. Jake had kept it stocked with MREs, water, medical supplies, and enough ammunition to hold off a small army. The windows were bulletproof glass, installed by a contractor who asked no questions for the right price. The basement had been reinforced with steel plates and had its own ventilation system. Elena followed him inside, her bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. Jake noticed she positioned herself where she could see all exits, survival instincts that no 8-year-old should possess. His encrypted satellite phone buzzed. Marcus Chen's voice crackled through the secure connection. "Bad news, brother. Vargas put a $5 million bounty on the girl. Every sicario from Tijuana to Brownsville is mobilizing." Jake moved to the kitchen, keeping his voice low. "What about federal protection?" "DEA's interested, but they want her testimony first. They're not offering witness protection until they can verify what she knows. Problem is, trauma's got her locked up tight." Through the doorway, Jake watched Elena explore the living room with careful, measured steps. She paused at a framed photograph. Jake and his SEAL team after a successful mission in Afghanistan. Young men with hard eyes and easy smiles, most of them dead now. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "Vargas's nephew, the one who died in that warehouse? Turns out he wasn't just muscle. Kid was being groomed to take over the family business. This isn't just about eliminating a witness anymore. It's personal." The phone went dead. Jake pocketed it and found Elena standing beside him, having moved with the silence of smoke. Her presence still startled him. A child shouldn't be able to move like that. "Tienes hambre?" he asked, switching to Spanish. "Are you hungry?" She shook her head, but her stomach betrayed her with a loud rumble. Jake opened a can of soup, heated it on the gas stove, and set a bowl on the small dining table. Elena approached cautiously, as if the meal might be a trap. While she ate, Jake cleaned his weapons, a ritual that calmed his nerves and sent a message. The Glock 19, the AR-15, the backup, 380 strapped to his ankle. Elena watched him work, her spoon pausing halfway to her mouth. "Mi papa," she whispered suddenly. "My father." Jake's hands stilled on the rifle's bolt carrier. It was the first time she'd spoken since the gas station. "He taught me to shoot," she continued in accented English, her voice barely audible. "Said bad men would come someday. Said I should be ready." "Smart man," Jake replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Did he teach you anything else?" Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. "He taught me to run, to hide, to remember everything." She touched her temple. "Everything is here." Jake understood now why Vargas wanted her dead. She wasn't just a witness. She was a living database of cartel operations. Her father had prepared her to be his insurance policy, his guarantee that if the cartel turned on him, his knowledge would survive. The motion sensors chimed on his phone. Jake's blood turned to ice as he read the display. Multiple contacts approaching from the south, moving fast. Vehicle signatures suggested motorcycles, the cartel's preferred method for rural operations. "Elena," his voice carried the authority of 100 combat missions. "We need to go to the basement. Now." She didn't argue, didn't ask questions. She simply nodded and followed him to the hidden panel behind the bookshelf. As they descended into the reinforced bunker, Jake heard the distant rumble of engines growing louder. The war had found them. Above their heads, gravel crunched under tires as vehicles surrounded the house. Jake checked his weapons one final time and looked at the small girl whose survival had become his mission. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "stay behind me." The safe house sat like a forgotten relic among the pine trees, its weathered walls bearing decades of Sierra Nevada winters. Marcus pulled the stolen pickup behind a stand of Douglas firs, killing the engine as morning light filtered through the canopy above. The silence felt different here, cleaner somehow, without the weight of pursuit pressing against his shoulders. Sophia stirred in the passenger seat, her dark eyes scanning their surroundings with the wariness of someone who'd learned too young that safety was always temporary. She'd barely spoken since they'd abandoned the highway 12 hours ago, communicating mostly through nods and the occasional whispered sigh or no. "We're going to be okay here for a while," Marcus said, shouldering his pack. The cabin belonged to his old platoon sergeant, a man who understood the value of places that didn't officially exist. No records, no paper trail, just a handshake agreement made years ago over beers and war stories. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight streaming through grimy windows. The place smelled of disuse and old wood, but the essentials were there: running water, a generator, enough canned goods to last a week. Marcus had stashed additional supplies here during his darker days after leaving the teams, when paranoia had seemed like wisdom. Sophia gravitated toward a corner where she could see both the front door and the back window, her small frame disappearing into an oversized chair. Marcus pretended not to notice her positioning while he checked the perimeter, but internally he catalogued another piece of evidence of whatever hell she'd survived. The sat phone buzzed against his chest, and he stepped outside to answer. Detective Chen's voice crackled through the static-laden connection. "The bodies from the warehouse have been identified," she said without preamble. DEA cross-referenced them with known associates of the Sinaloa cartel. High-level enforcers, Marcus. The kind of men who don't get sent after small-time problems. Marcus watched a hawk circle overhead, its wings catching thermals with predatory grace. What else? "The massacre site where we think she came from, we found it. 43 bodies, execution style, men, women, teenagers. But here's what's interesting. They weren't random victims. Every adult had ties to Los Hermanos, a smaller organization that's been muscling in on Sinaloa territory." The pieces clicked together in Marcus's mind like rounds sliding into a magazine. A power play. More than that. Intelligence suggests Los Hermanos had something Sinaloa wanted, something worth wiping out an entire compound to get. Chen paused. "The question is whether your girl saw them take it or if she knows where it's hidden." Through the cabin window, Marcus could see Sophia's reflection in the glass, her gaze fixed on some invisible point in the distance. Such a small thing to carry such enormous weight. "There's more," Chen continued. "Customs flagged unusual movement at the border. 3 separate teams of known cartel operatives crossed in the last 24 hours. Professional hunters, Marcus. They're not just looking for her anymore, they're hunting her with everything they have." The hawk above suddenly folded its wings and dove, disappearing beyond the tree line with lethal purpose. Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest that preceded combat, the body's ancient preparation for violence. "How long do you think we have?" "Hard to say. The stolen truck probably bought you some time, but if they have the resources, I think they do." Chen's voice trailed off, leaving the implication hanging in the mountain air. Marcus ended the call and stood for a moment in the cool morning breeze, letting his mind run through tactical possibilities. The cabin was defensible, but not indefinitely. They had maybe a day, possibly 2, before he'd need to move again. The smart play would be to hand Sophia over to federal protection, let the system handle what came next. But systems could be compromised, people could be bought. And something in the way Sophia looked at him, like he was the last solid thing in a world that had betrayed her, made that option feel like abandonment. Inside, he found her curled in the chair, her small hand clutched around something at her neck. A pendant, he realized, though she kept it hidden beneath her shirt. Whatever it was, she guarded it with the fierce protectiveness of a wounded animal protecting its young. "Are you hungry?" he asked, moving slowly to avoid startling her. She nodded, and he busied himself opening cans and heating water on the small camp stove. Normal actions in an abnormal situation, but routine had value when everything else felt uncertain. As she ate, Marcus cleaned his weapons and checked his ammunition. 47 rounds for the pistol, 30 in the rifle magazine. Enough for a small war, but possibly not enough for what was coming. Outside, the forest held its breath, and somewhere in the distance, professional killers were reading signs and closing the gap between hunter and prey. The safe house felt more like a prison with each passing hour. Marcus paced the small living room while Sophia sat curled on the couch, sketching in a notebook Agent Rivera had brought her. The drawing showed stick figures running from larger, darker shapes that looked like monsters with guns. "We can't stay here forever," Marcus said, watching the child's pencil move across the paper. "Vega's people will find us eventually." Rivera looked up from her laptop, where she'd been coordinating with the task force. "The safe house network is solid. We've moved dozens of witnesses through here." How many of those witnesses had Hector Vega personally hunting them? Before Rivera could answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and her expression darkened. "I need to take this." She stepped into the kitchen, but Marcus could hear fragments of the heated conversation. Words like compromised and immediate extraction made his blood run cold. Rivera returned, already grabbing her jacket. "We're moving, now." "What happened?" "Someone leaked our location. Vega's sicarios are 20 minutes out, maybe less." She was stuffing files into a bag, her movements sharp and efficient. "There's a backup location 40 miles north." Marcus was already scooping up Sophia, who dropped her pencil in alarm. "It's okay, Princess. We're just going for another ride." But Sophia's eyes were wide with terror, and she began speaking rapidly in Spanish, pointing toward the window. Marcus didn't understand the words, but her panic was unmistakable. "What's she saying?" Rivera demanded. "Something about the trees," Marcus said, following Sophia's gaze. The safe house backed up to dense woodland, and the afternoon shadows were growing longer. "She sees something." Rivera pulled her weapon, moving to the window. "I don't see—" The first bullet shattered the kitchen window. Rivera dove behind the counter as Marcus hit the floor with Sophia, rolling them both behind the heavy oak coffee table. "So much for 20 minutes, Marcus growled, drawing his sidearm. More shots peppered the house, systematic and precise. These weren't random gangbangers spraying bullets. This was professional work. Marcus counted at least 4 different firing positions based on the angles. "Back door?" he called to Rivera. "Covered," she shouted back. "They've got us surrounded." Sophia was trembling against his chest, but she wasn't crying. Instead, she tugged at his shirt and pointed toward the floor. When Marcus looked confused, she scrambled to a heating vent near the wall and began pulling at the grate. "Smart girl," he whispered. The vent was large enough for a child, maybe even an adult in a pinch. "Rivera, the girl found us an exit." A new sound made them all freeze, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. Marcus felt a moment of hope until he saw Rivera's expression. "That's not ours," she said grimly. "Our backup is still 15 minutes away." The shooting intensified, and Marcus heard boots on the front porch. They were out of time. He quickly pulled the vent cover away, revealing a dark passage that seemed to run under the house. "Can you crawl through there?" he asked Sophia. She nodded, already moving toward the opening. "Wait." Rivera appeared beside them, having low-crawled across the room. "I'm not letting you go out there alone." "Someone needs to slow them down," Marcus said. "Give us a head start." "That's suicide." Marcus checked his weapon. 2 full magazines left, maybe. But it's Sophia they really want. Get her to safety. Rivera looked like she wanted to argue, but another burst of gunfire decided for her. "There's an old logging road 1/2 mile through those woods. Follow it north until you hit the main highway." Marcus was already pushing Sophia into the vent. "Go with Agent Rivera, Princess. I'll catch up." Sophia grabbed his hand, her eyes pleading. For a moment, she looked exactly like the lost child he'd found on that highway before she'd learned to trust him, before he'd made her a promise he might not be able to keep. "I'll find you," he said, the same words he'd spoken that first night. "I promise." Sophia reluctantly released his hand and crawled into the darkness. Rivera followed, her weapon ready. Marcus waited until he couldn't hear them anymore, then moved to the front window. The helicopter was landing in the small clearing beside the house. Through the broken glass, he could see armed figures moving between the trees with military precision. These weren't ordinary cartel soldiers. They moved like special forces. Marcus smiled grimly. Finally, a fair fight. He kicked over the coffee table for better cover and settled in to make Vega's people earn every inch. In the distance, he could hear the sound of his own backup approaching, but they were still too far away. The front door exploded inward, and the real battle began. The safe house felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus had been awake for hours, his internal clock refusing to adjust to civilian time. Through the grimy window, he watched the empty street below, searching for any sign of movement that didn't belong. The girl, Sophia, she'd finally whispered her name 3 days ago, slept fitfully on the narrow cot behind him, her small frame curled beneath a threadbare blanket. Detective Rivera had delivered the news yesterday with the exhausted look of someone who'd seen too much. The Durango cartel had put a $5 million bounty on Sophia's head. Not just her death, they wanted her alive. The little girl had witnessed something that went far beyond the massacre of her family, something that could topple the entire organization if it reached the right ears. Marcus's burner phone buzzed once against his thigh. A text from Rivera movement at the border. "They're coming north." He deleted the message and pocketed the phone. They'd known this moment would come. The safe house was compromised, had been from the start. Rivera's department leaked like a sieve, and Marcus had learned long ago that in operations like this, paranoia was just another word for survival. Sophia stirred behind him, a soft whimper escaping her lips. She'd been having the same nightmare every night, calling out for her mother in rapid Spanish. Marcus had picked up enough of the language during his deployments to understand the pain in her voice, but not enough to offer comfort in her native tongue. Instead, he'd simply sit beside her cot until the trembling stopped. "We need to move," he whispered, turning from the window. Sophia's eyes were already open, wide and alert despite the early hour. She'd developed the same hypervigilance that kept soldiers alive in combat zones. No 8-year-old should possess that particular skill set. She nodded without question, rolling from the cot and reaching for the small backpack that held her few possessions. Marcus had taught her to keep it packed and ready. In his world, speed meant survival. The escape route Marcus had planned would take them through the city's industrial district to a cargo yard where Rivera had arranged transportation. From there, they'd disappear into the maze of freight trains heading north. It wasn't elegant, but elegant got you killed. They moved through the building's rear exit into an alley that reeked of garbage and broken dreams. Marcus kept one hand on Sophia's shoulder, the other resting on the Sig Sauer concealed beneath his jacket. The streets were too quiet for this part of the city. Even at this hour, there should have been some signs of life: delivery trucks, early commuters, the occasional patrol car. Instead, they moved through a ghost town. 2 blocks from the safe house, Marcus spotted the first tail, a dark sedan idling at the corner, exhaust visible in the cold morning air. Professional surveillance always made the same mistake. They tried too hard to look casual. Marcus had been tracking enemy movement since before Sophia was born. He could smell an ambush from 3 blocks away. He guided Sophia into a narrow passage between 2 apartment buildings, pressing against the brick wall that still held yesterday's heat. His mind automatically shifted into mission mode, calculating angles and exit strategies. The passage connected to a parallel street, but getting there meant crossing 20 feet of open ground where they'd be visible from multiple positions. "Sophia," he whispered, crouching to her eye level. "Remember what we practiced?" She nodded, her small hand finding his. They'd rehearsed this scenario dozens of times, different routes, different contingencies, different ways to disappear when the world went sideways. Marcus peered around the corner. 3 more vehicles had materialized, forming a loose perimeter around their position. These weren't local cops or federal agents. The coordination was too precise, the positioning too tactical. The cartel had sent their best. His phone buzzed again. Rivera abort. Compromised. Trust no one. The detective's warning came too late. Marcus could already hear boots on pavement, the distinctive sound of tactical teams moving into position. They'd been played from the beginning. The safe house, the escape route, maybe even Rivera himself. All part of an elaborate trap designed to flush them into the open. Sophia tugged at his sleeve, pointing toward a maintenance ladder that led to the building's fire escape. The girl's survival instincts had sharpened during their time together. While he'd been focused on street-level threats, she'd found a path he'd missed. Marcus tested the ladder's lowest rung. It held his weight, barely. They'd have to climb 3 stories to reach the roof, then navigate across multiple buildings to find another way down. It was desperate and dangerous, but desperation had kept him alive through 4 tours of duty. He lifted Sophia onto his back, feeling her thin arms wrap around his neck. As they began their ascent, voices echoed from the alley below. Spanish mixed with accented English, orders given in the clipped tone of professionals who expected immediate compliance. The hunt had officially begun. The safe house felt smaller with each passing hour, its walls closing in like a trap Marcus couldn't see coming. Sophia had barely spoken since the phone call with her uncle, retreating into herself with a silence that reminded him too much of those first days on the highway. She sat curled in the corner of the couch, clutching the stuffed rabbit Elena had given her, dark eyes staring at nothing. Marcus checked his watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Miguel Santos would arrive soon with whatever intelligence he'd gathered about the Vega cartel's movements. The waiting was eating at him. Every SEAL instinct screamed that sitting still meant dying slow. Elena emerged from the kitchen carrying 2 cups of coffee, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Any word from your contact?" "He'll be here." Marcus accepted the cup, noting how her hands trembled slightly. The stress was wearing on all of them. "How's she doing?" "Scared, confused. She keeps asking why her uncle hasn't come for her yet." Elena settled beside Sophia on the couch, speaking in gentle Spanish. The little girl's only response was to burrow deeper into the cushions. A low whistle from outside made Marcus freeze. 3 short, 2 long. Miguel's signal. Marcus moved to the window, scanning the tree line before responding with his own whistle. Within minutes, Miguel appeared at the back door, his usual easy demeanor replaced by grim urgency. "We have problems," Miguel said without preamble, declining Elena's offer of coffee. "Big ones. I made some calls, talked to people who owe me favors." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Tell me." "There is no Uncle Eduardo, at least, not anymore." Miguel's eyes found Sophia, softening slightly before returning to Marcus. "Eduardo Morales died 3 years ago. Cancer." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Elena's hand flew to her mouth, and Sophia looked up from her rabbit, confusion clouding her features even though she couldn't understand the English. "Then who?" Elena started. "Someone who knows enough about the family to fool a traumatized child," Marcus said, pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. "Someone who's been hunting us this whole time." Miguel nodded grimly. "My contacts say the Vegas have been spreading money around, looking for information about a gringo and a little girl. They're offering enough cash to make good men consider bad choices." Marcus set down his coffee, mind racing through scenarios. "How long do we have?" "They know you're in the area. Probably have known for days." "My guess?" "They're closing the net slowly, making sure you can't slip through." Miguel paused, studying Sophia. "There's something else. The massacre at the compound, it wasn't random violence. Sophia's father was skimming money, planning to disappear with his family. Someone tipped off the Vegas. Inside job," Marcus said. It explained the thoroughness of the killing, the way they'd hunted down every family member. Except they missed one. Miguel's expression darkened. "And now she's the only witness to their operation. They can't let her live." Elena pulled Sophia closer, whispering reassurances in Spanish. The little girl's eyes darted between the adults, picking up on the tension, even if she couldn't understand the words. Marcus moved to the window again, studying the surrounding forest with new paranoia. "Options. Run, fight, or surrender," Miguel said bluntly. "Running means staying ahead of them forever. Fighting means taking on an army with unlimited resources. Surrendering." He shrugged eloquently. "Not happening." Marcus's voice carried the finality of an order. "Can you get us across the border?" "Maybe. I have connections, but moving a child complicates things, and if they're watching the routes—" Miguel trailed off, the implication clear. A sound from outside made all three adults freeze. Car engines, multiple vehicles approaching fast. Marcus grabbed his rifle, motioning for Elena to get Sophia away from the windows. Through the glass he counted headlights, at least 4 vehicles surrounding the house. "Back door," he whispered. But Miguel was already shaking his head. "They'll have it covered. These aren't amateurs." Floodlights blazed to life, turning night into harsh daylight. A voice boomed through a megaphone, speaking Spanish with cold authority. Marcus didn't need translation. The universal language of surrender demands was clear enough. Elena had Sophia pressed against her chest, the child's face buried in her shoulder. For a moment, Marcus saw them as the family they could have been in another life, another world where little girls didn't witness massacres and former SEALs didn't have to choose between duty and survival. "There's a storm cellar under the kitchen floor," he said quietly. "Hidden panel behind the refrigerator." Miguel and Elena stared at him. Outside, the voice continued its demands, patience wearing thin. "I'm going out there," Marcus continued. "Give me 5 minutes, then get to that cellar. Miguel, you know the country. Get them to the border." "Marcus, no." Elena started, but he was already moving toward the door. Time for talking was over. The safe house felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Jake's eyes snapped open at the sound, barely perceptible but wrong. A whisper of movement where there should be none. His hand found his sidearm in one fluid motion as he rolled silently from the couch. Sophia slept fitfully on the narrow bed across the room, her small frame curled beneath a threadbare blanket. Her breathing hitched occasionally, caught in whatever nightmare plagued her dreams. Jake had positioned himself between her and the only entrance, but now his tactical mind calculated distances and angles with deadly precision. The floorboard creaked outside the door. Jake's pulse remained steady as he moved through the darkness, every step deliberate and silent. His bare feet found the cool spots on the wooden floor, avoiding the planks he'd memorized as loose during their brief time here. The weight of the Glock felt familiar in his grip, an extension of his will. A shadow passed by the window, there, then gone. They'd found them. Somehow, despite Ramirez's assurances and the safe house's remote location, Vega's men had tracked them down. Jake's jaw tightened as he considered their options. The nearest backup was 30 minutes away, and Sophia couldn't run far on her injured leg. The doorknob turned with agonizing slowness. Jake pressed himself against the wall beside the entrance, controlling his breathing. Through the thin walls he could hear movement, at least 3 distinct sets of footsteps positioning themselves around the small structure. Professional, coordinated. These weren't street thugs or local muscle. Vega had sent his best. The door eased open inch by inch. Moonlight spilled across the threshold, creating geometric shadows that shifted as the first figure appeared. Black tactical gear, suppressed weapon, night vision goggles pushed up on his forehead. The Sicario moved like a predator, scanning the room with practiced efficiency. Jake struck before the man's eyes could adjust to the interior darkness. His left hand clamped over the intruder's mouth while his right drove the knife, taken from the safe house kitchen, between ribs with surgical precision. The Sicario's body went rigid, then limp. Jake lowered him silently to the floor. Sophia stirred, but didn't wake. The second man called out softly in Spanish, a status check. When no answer came, Jake heard the barely audible click of a radio transmitter. They were coordinating, adjusting their approach. He had perhaps 30 seconds before they breached in force. Jake moved to Sophia's bedside, his hand gentle on her shoulder. Her eyes flew open, instantly alert with the hypervigilance of trauma. He pressed a finger to his lips, and she nodded, understanding flooding her dark eyes. Together, they'd been through too much for panic. "Bad men?" she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. "Yes, but I won't let them hurt you." The words felt inadequate, but Sophia's grip on his hand told him she believed them. Jake scooped her up, ignoring her sharp intake of breath as her injured leg protested. They needed to reach the back window, their only escape route. Glass exploded inward as the front windows shattered simultaneously. Smoke grenades hit the floor, billowing grey clouds that burned Jake's throat and eyes. Tactical lights pierced the haze like malevolent stars as the remaining sicarios poured through multiple entry points. Jake fired twice, muzzle flashes illuminating faces behind weapons. One figure spun and dropped, but answering gunfire chewed through the wooden walls around them. Sophia buried her face against his shoulder as Jake dove toward the rear of the house. The back window proved to be their salvation, and nearly their doom. Jake shot out the glass and rolled through the frame, with Sophia clutched against his chest, absorbing the impact on his shoulder and back. They hit the ground hard, Jake's body cushioning her fall as automatic weapons chattered behind them. The forest beckoned, dense pine and undergrowth that would provide cover but also slow their escape. Sophia couldn't run, and carrying her would make them easy targets in daylight. Jake's mind raced through tactical options as boots thundered through the compromised safe house behind them. "Can you hold on tight?" he asked Sophia. She nodded, wrapping her arms around his neck with surprising strength. Jake adjusted his grip and sprinted for the tree line, zigzagging to throw off any marksman's aim. Bullets whined past them, bark exploding from pine trunks as the sicarios gave chase. In the darkness beneath the canopy, Jake allowed himself a moment to breathe. Sophia's heart hammered against his chest, but she remained silent, trusting him completely. That trust felt heavier than her physical weight, a responsibility that went beyond his mission parameters into something more personal. Voices called out in Spanish, organizing a search pattern. They had minutes before the net closed around them. Jake checked his phone, no signal. They were alone in enemy territory with a wounded child and limited ammunition. But Jake had been alone behind enemy lines before, and he'd never failed to bring someone home. The safe house felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus lay on the narrow cot, his body finally still but his mind racing through contingencies. Every creak of the old building, every whisper of wind against the windows kept his hand inches from his sidearm. Sleep had come in fragments, 10 minutes here, 20 there, punctuated by Sophia's soft whimpers from across the room. She'd barely spoken since the warehouse. The girl who had shown such fierce courage now seemed to fold in on herself, as if the reality of what they faced was finally sinking in. Marcus understood that particular weight, the way survival could leave you hollow even in victory. Agent Rivera had left them with promises of backup and extraction plans, but Marcus trusted his own instincts more than government assurances. He'd seen too many operations go sideways, too many good people abandoned when politics trumped principles. The burner phone vibrated against the wooden table. Marcus was upright and moving before the second buzz, noting that Sophia's breathing never changed. The kid was learning to sleep through anything, a skill no child should need. "Yeah," he answered, keeping his voice low. "We've got movement." Rivera's voice was tight. "Santana's people found the warehouse. They know about the missing drives." Marcus felt his jaw clench. "How long do we have?" "They're mobilizing everything. Word is Santana's put a $5 million bounty on the girl. Dead or alive, but he wants proof either way." The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. 5 million would bring every sicario, bounty hunter, and desperate criminal within 1,000 miles. It would turn every stranger into a potential threat, every public space into a killing ground. "What about federal protection?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer from Rivera's tone. "My superiors are reassessing the situation. The political implications of going after Santana directly are complicated. There's talk of handing this over to the Mexican authorities." Marcus nearly laughed at the bitter irony. "You mean the same authorities Santana owns? That's a death sentence." "I know. That's why I'm calling. You need to disappear, and you need to do it now. I can give you maybe 6 hours before they start looking for this location." Through the small window, Marcus could see the first hints of dawn touching the horizon. 6 hours to vanish with a traumatized 7-year-old, with every criminal organization in the Southwest hunting them. The odds were beyond grim. "There's something else," Rivera continued. "We intercepted communications suggesting Santana's bringing in outside help, professional contractors, military trained." The implication hung in the air. This wasn't just about cartel enforcers anymore. Santana was escalating, bringing in operators who could match Marcus's own skills. The playing field had just shifted dramatically. "Send me everything you have on the contractors," Marcus said. "And Rivera, thanks for the heads up. Don't thank me yet. Just keep that little girl alive." The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of impossible choices. He looked over at Sophia's sleeping form, so small and vulnerable in the dim light. She'd already lost everything: family, home, the innocent belief that adults could keep children safe. Now she was the center of a manhunt that would follow them across continents if necessary. Marcus began moving with quiet efficiency, gathering their meager supplies and checking his weapons. The safe house had served its purpose, but now it was a trap waiting to spring. They needed to be ghosts, invisible and untraceable. Sophia stirred as he zipped up the backpack, her dark eyes opening with the hyper-alert awareness of someone who'd learned that safety was always temporary. "We have to go again?" she asked in Spanish, her voice small but steady. "Sí, mija. But I have a plan." It wasn't entirely true. Plans required certainty, and Marcus was operating on instinct and training now. But he'd learned something important about Sophia during their ordeal. She was strongest when she felt like part of the solution rather than just a victim to be protected. "Where are we going?" she asked, sitting up and reaching for her own small bag. Marcus knelt down to her level, meeting her eyes directly. "Somewhere they won't think to look. But Sophia, this is going to be the hardest part. We can't trust anyone now except each other. Do you understand?" She nodded solemnly, and Marcus saw something that made his chest tight: absolute trust. This little girl, who had every reason to doubt the world and everyone in it, was placing her complete faith in him. The responsibility was crushing and strengthening at the same time. As they prepared to leave the safe house, Marcus made a silent promise. He'd failed people before, lost teammates and civilians despite his best efforts. But not this time. Not her. Whatever it took, however far they had to run, Sophia would survive this. The sun was rising as they slipped out the back door, two shadows moving toward an uncertain dawn. The warehouse smelled of rust and decay, a perfect monument to abandonment on the outskirts of Juarez. Marcus pressed his back against the corrugated metal wall, listening to the rumble of approaching vehicles. 3 sets of headlights cut through the darkness outside, their beams sweeping across broken windows like searchlights hunting prey. Sophia's small hand gripped his tactical vest, her breathing shallow but controlled. Over the past week, she'd transformed from a terrified child into something harder, more focused. The innocence was still there, buried beneath layers of survival instinct that no 8-year-old should possess. "Remember what we practiced," Marcus whispered, checking his rifle one final time. The weight of his remaining magazines told a story he didn't want to acknowledge. They were running low on everything except determination. The vehicles stopped. Car doors slammed in sequence, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots on gravel. Marcus counted at least 8 sets of footsteps, maybe more. Ramirez had brought a small army to finish what started with a massacre on a dusty road that felt like a lifetime ago. "Señor Marcus," a voice called out, heavily accented but confident. "You have led us quite a chase. But this ends tonight." Marcus recognized the voice from intercepted radio chatter. Lieutenant Carlos Vega, Ramirez's most trusted enforcer, a man who'd earned his reputation by leaving no witnesses and taking no prisoners. "The girl knows too much," Vega continued, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "You know this. Why die for someone else's secrets?" Sophia's grip tightened. She understood more English than she let on, had probably understood it all along. Marcus caught her eye and saw not fear, but resolve. She'd watched her entire family die because of what she'd witnessed in that compound. She knew exactly what these men were capable of. The first breach came from the north entrance. Three figures in tactical gear moved with practiced precision, their weapon lights cutting through the darkness. Marcus waited until they'd committed to their approach before opening fire. The controlled bursts from his rifle dropped the lead man instantly, sending the others scrambling for cover behind overturned machinery. Return fire erupted from multiple directions. Muzzle flashes strobed like deadly fireworks, and the air filled with the sharp crack of high-velocity rounds punching through metal. Marcus pulled Sophia deeper into the maze of abandoned equipment, using the industrial debris as both cover and concealment. "South side," Sophia whispered, pointing toward a section of wall Marcus couldn't see clearly. Her hearing had become supernatural over the past week, honed by constant danger. He pivoted just as two sicarios rounded a massive lathe, their rifles already swinging toward Sophia's position. Marcus put them down with methodical efficiency, but not before one managed to trigger a long burst that sparked off the concrete floor inches from where they crouched. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Vega's men had surrounded the building and were pressing their advantage with overwhelming firepower. Chunks of concrete rained down as heavy-caliber rounds chewed through the walls. The smell of cordite mixed with rust and fear sweat. Marcus's radio crackled. "Torres, right on schedule. Phoenix, this is Eagle. Package is inbound. 2 minutes out." The extraction helicopter. Marcus had called in every favor, burned every bridge, and cashed in 15 years of service to arrange this one shot at getting Sophia to safety. The bird would hover for exactly 60 seconds before the pilot's survival instincts overrode his loyalty. Moving to extract point, Marcus transmitted, already pulling Sophia toward the pre-planned route. They moved through the industrial graveyard like ghosts, using the massive machinery to mask their movement. Behind them, Vega's men were advancing methodically, their tactical lights probing every shadow. These weren't street thugs. They moved like military, with discipline and coordination that made them infinitely more dangerous. The sound of rotor blades grew louder, competing with the gunfire that seemed to come from every direction. Marcus could see their destination, a clear section of the warehouse floor where the roof had partially collapsed, creating a natural landing zone. 50 meters. 40. The helicopter's spotlight found them, bathing them in harsh white light that made them perfect targets. Marcus shielded Sophia with his body as concrete exploded around them, the incoming fire intensifying as Vega's men realized their quarry was about to escape. 20 meters from the extract point, Marcus felt the familiar burn of a bullet creasing his shoulder. He stumbled but kept moving. Sophia's hand locked in his as she matched his pace with the determination of someone who'd already lost everything once. The helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of dust and debris. The crew chief gestured frantically from the open door, his own rifle adding suppressive fire to cover their final sprint. Marcus lifted Sophia toward the waiting hands, watching as she disappeared into the aircraft's belly. For a moment, their eyes met through the chaos, and he saw something that broke his heart, gratitude mixed with the terrible knowledge that this was goodbye. He turned back toward the approaching muzzle flashes, his rifle ready. The abandoned warehouse reeked of rust and decay, but it was their best option for a final stand. Marcus carried Sophia through the maze of corrugated metal sheeting and broken concrete, his rifle ready despite the dead weight of exhaustion in his shoulders. Blood from his shoulder wound had soaked through the makeshift bandage Elena had applied hours earlier. "There," Elena whispered, pointing to a raised platform near the back wall. Steel girders created natural cover, and a maintenance ladder offered an escape route to the roof if needed. More importantly, it gave them a clear view of all approaches. Marcus set Sophia down gently. The little girl had barely spoken since the firefight at the bridge, her dark eyes reflecting a trauma that went deeper than words. She clutched the small wooden cross Elena had given her, the only remnant of her previous life. "How many rounds do we have left?" Elena asked, checking her pistol's magazine. Marcus did a quick inventory. 37 for the rifle, 2 grenades, your sidearm. He didn't mention that his vision kept blurring from blood loss, or that his hands had started trembling. They both knew their situation was desperate. The rumble of engines echoed through the industrial district, multiple vehicles approaching fast. Through the grimy windows, Marcus could see headlights sweeping the area like hunting predators. "Vasquez found us," Elena said grimly. Sophia suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm. "The tunnels," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What tunnels, sweetheart?" She pointed toward the floor near the far wall. Now that Marcus looked closer, he could see the outline of an old maintenance hatch, partially hidden by debris. Storm drains, Elena realized. This whole district was built over the old drainage system. The engines stopped. Car doors slammed in the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of tactical teams organizing. Vasquez wasn't taking any chances this time. Marcus moved to the hatch and pulled away the debris. The metal cover was heavy but not locked. Below, a concrete tunnel stretched into darkness, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. "It's our only chance," he said. "Elena, you take Sophia and go first. I'm not leaving you behind." "That's an order, Agent Morales." She grabbed his vest, her eyes fierce. "We started this together. We finish it together." Before Marcus could argue, the first explosion rocked the building. Flashbang grenades detonated near the entrance, followed by the sharp crack of automatic weapons. The cartel soldiers were moving fast, clearing the warehouse section by section. "Go!" Marcus hissed, lifting the hatch cover fully. Elena dropped into the tunnel first, then reached up for Sophia. The little girl looked at Marcus one last time, her expression both grateful and terrified. "Gracias," she whispered. "See you on the other side, princess." Marcus lowered himself into the tunnel just as boots thundered across the warehouse floor above. The space was cramped and reeked of stagnant water, but it beat being trapped in a crossfire. They crawled in single file through the darkness, guided only by Elena's small flashlight. Behind them, muffled shouts indicated the cartel soldiers had found their hiding spot. It wouldn't take them long to discover the tunnel entrance. The concrete scraped against Marcus's wounded shoulder, sending waves of pain down his arm. His breathing was becoming labored, each movement requiring enormous effort. But Sophia was crawling steadily ahead of Elena, showing courage that humbled him. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they reached a junction where 3 tunnels converged. Elena's flashlight revealed a maintenance shaft leading upward. "This should put us 3 blocks away," she said, studying the layout. Marcus boosted Sophia up first, then Elena. As he prepared to follow, the beam of a tactical flashlight cut through the darkness behind them. The cartel soldiers had found the tunnel. He pulled the pin from one of his remaining grenades and rolled it back down the tunnel. The explosion would buy them precious seconds, maybe a minute if they were lucky. When he emerged from the shaft, they were in an alley behind a row of shuttered shops. Dawn was breaking over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. In the distance, Marcus could see the bell tower of an old church. "Sanctuary," Elena said, following his gaze. "The priest there, Father Miguel, he helps people disappear when they need to." Sophia took Marcus's hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong. "Will we be safe there?" Marcus looked down at her, this brave little girl who had survived horrors that would break most adults. He thought about lying, giving her the comfort of false hope. Instead, he chose honesty. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise you this. As long as I'm breathing, nothing is going to hurt you." Behind them, smoke rose from the warehouse district. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance, but Marcus knew the local police wouldn't be much help. This fight was far from over. They started walking toward the church, 3 unlikely allies against an empire built on blood and fear. The safe house exploded into chaos as automatic gunfire shattered every window simultaneously. Marcus threw himself over Sophia, driving them both behind the reinforced concrete wall as bullets chewed through the air where they'd been standing seconds before. Glass cascaded around them like deadly rain. "They found us," Elena gasped, crawling toward them with blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. "How did they—" "Doesn't matter now," Marcus cut her off, checking his rifle's magazine. He had maybe 40 rounds left, not nearly enough for what was coming. Sophia, remember what we practiced. Stay low, stay behind me, and when I say run, you run." The little girl nodded, her dark eyes wide but steady. After everything she'd endured, she'd learned to be brave when it mattered most. Marcus felt a surge of fierce protectiveness that burned hotter than rage. "Contact front!" Agent Rivera's voice crackled through the radio from his position upstairs. "I count at least 12, moving in formation. Professional military tactics. These aren't street thugs." Marcus cursed under his breath. Valdez had sent his best. The cartel leader wasn't taking any chances, not with his empire hanging in the balance and Sophia as the key witness who could destroy everything he'd built. A grenade bounced through the shattered window, spinning across the floor like a metal harbinger of death. Marcus scooped Sophia up and dove toward the kitchen as the explosion tore through the living room, filling the air with smoke and debris. His ears rang, but he forced himself to keep moving. "Back exit!" he shouted to Elena, who was helping Rivera down the stairs. The agent's left arm hung useless, blood soaking through his tactical vest. "We need to reach the vehicle." But as they moved toward the rear of the house, muzzle flashes lit up the backyard. More gunmen. They were surrounded just as Valdez had planned. This wasn't just an assault, it was an execution. "Basement." Elena pointed toward a door Marcus had overlooked. "There's a storm cellar that connects to the neighbor's property, old smuggling tunnel from Prohibition." They thundered down the wooden steps as gunfire intensified above them. Heavy boots stomped across the floor, searching room by room. Voices shouted in rapid Spanish, Valdez's men coordinating their sweep. The basement was cramped and musty, filled with forgotten furniture and cobwebs. Elena led them to what looked like a blank wall, but when she pressed a hidden lever, a section swung inward to reveal a narrow tunnel carved from earth and stone. "I go first," Marcus said, checking his weapon. "Elena, you're with Sophia in the middle. Rivera brings up the rear." They crawled through the darkness, guided only by Elena's small flashlight. The tunnel stretched for what felt like miles, but was probably only a few hundred yards. Behind them, Marcus could hear the muffled sounds of the safe house being torn apart. Soon the gunmen would find the basement, then the tunnel entrance. They emerged into another cellar, this one beneath an abandoned farmhouse. Marcus helped Sophia up, noting how she hadn't made a single sound during their escape. This child had been through hell, but she was a survivor. "Vehicles in the barn," Elena whispered, leading them up into the main house. Through grimy windows, Marcus could see lights from the safe house burning against the night sky. Smoke rose in black columns. They reached the barn without incident, finding Elena's backup plan, a modified pickup truck with armor plating and bulletproof glass. Not military grade, but better than nothing. As Marcus started the engine, headlights swept across the farmhouse. They'd been found again. "They're tracking us somehow," Rivera said through gritted teeth, pressing a field dressing against his wounded shoulder. "GPS, radio frequency, something." Marcus thought fast, his mind racing through possibilities. Then Sophia tugged at his sleeve and held up her small backpack, the one possession she'd carried since the night her family died. "The teddy bear," Marcus breathed, understanding flooding through him. He unzipped the backpack and pulled out Sophia's beloved stuffed animal. Hidden in the fabric, barely visible, was a tiny electronic device. "Bastards," Elena snarled. "They planted it when they had her at the compound. She's been carrying their tracker this whole time." Marcus ripped the device free and crushed it under his boot. But it was too late. Valdez's men were already surrounding the barn, their weapons trained on the truck. "We're outnumbered 10-1, Rivera observed grimly. "Maybe we should consider surrender." "No," Sophia spoke for the first time in hours, her voice small but determined. "No more running. I'm tired of being afraid." Marcus looked down at her fierce little face and made his decision. He'd spent his entire military career protecting the innocent, completing impossible missions against overwhelming odds. This was just another mission, the most important one of his life. "Then we make our stand here," he said, checking his rifle one final time. "But we do this smart." The barn doors exploded inward as Valdez's men prepared for their final assault. The warehouse erupted in chaos as Marcus dove behind a concrete pillar, bullets chipping away at the edges above his head. Sophia pressed against his back, her small body trembling but no longer paralyzed by fear. 3 weeks of running had transformed them both, him from a man seeking solitude to a protector willing to die for someone else's future, and her from a shattered witness to a survivor who had found her voice again. "Marcus!" Agent Rivera's shout cut through the gunfire. She was pinned down 20 yards away, her backup team scattered across the warehouse floor. What was supposed to be a controlled handoff had become a bloodbath when Vega's men arrived minutes before the federal agents. Marcus checked his magazine, 4 rounds left. Not nearly enough for the army of sicarios pouring through the warehouse entrances. He could hear Vega's voice echoing off the metal walls, barking orders in rapid Spanish. The cartel leader had come personally to finish what his men had started on that highway weeks ago. "Can you run to that lady?" Marcus whispered to Sophia, pointing toward Rivera's position. Sophia shook her head, eyes wide. "Not without you." The simple declaration hit him harder than any bullet could. This little girl who had lost everything refused to abandon him just as he had refused to abandon her. Marcus closed his eyes for a heartbeat, remembering his team's motto, "Leave no one behind." "Okay then, we go together." He pulled the smoke grenade from his vest, his last one, and yanked the pin. Grey clouds billowed across the warehouse floor as Marcus scooped Sophia into his arms and sprinted toward Rivera's position. Bullets whined past them, one so close it singed the fabric of his jacket. They slid behind Rivera's concrete barrier just as the smoke began to thin. The agent was bleeding from a graze on her temple, but still firing controlled bursts at the advancing sicarios. "Helicopters 2 minutes out," Rivera shouted over the gunfire. "We just have to—" A massive explosion rocked the warehouse as one of Vega's men fired an RPG at the far wall. The blast sent debris raining down and knocked out half the lights. In the chaos that followed, Marcus saw their chance. "Cover us," he told Rivera, then turned to Sophia. "Remember what I taught you about staying low?" She nodded, her face set with grim determination that no 8-year-old should possess. They moved as shadows through the darkened warehouse, Marcus using every trick his SEAL training had taught him about moving unseen through hostile territory. Sophia matched his movements perfectly, her small size an advantage as they slipped between shipping containers and abandoned machinery. They were almost to the rear exit when Vega himself appeared, flanked by 2 guards. The cartel leader's eyes locked onto Sophia with predatory satisfaction. "La Niña," Vega said softly. "You've caused me considerable trouble, little one." Marcus stepped protectively in front of Sophia, his last 4 bullets suddenly feeling precious as gold. "Let her go, Vega. Your fight is with me now." Vega laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "My fight is with anyone who cost me money." She saw my face. She can identify my operation. She dies tonight. The warehouse suddenly filled with new sound, the thunder of rotor blades as the federal helicopter approached. Searchlights blazed through the broken windows, and amplified voices demanded surrender in both English and Spanish. Vega's expression twisted with rage. In one fluid motion, he shoved his guards aside and raised his weapon toward Sophia. Marcus moved without thinking, muscle memory and protective instinct overriding rational thought. He launched himself sideways, putting his body between the gun and the little girl just as Vega fired. The bullet hit him in the shoulder, spinning him around but not dropping him. As he fell, Marcus's own weapon barked twice in rapid succession. Both rounds found their target, and Vega collapsed backward, his eyes already going glassy. Federal agents swarmed through the warehouse entrances as the helicopter touched down outside. Marcus felt small hands gripping his good arm as Sophia knelt beside him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm okay," he whispered, though blood was soaking through his shirt. "Just a scratch." Rivera appeared above them, speaking rapidly into her radio. "We need a medic now." and prepare witness protection protocols, full package. As paramedics worked on his shoulder, Marcus watched Sophia being led gently toward the waiting helicopter. She kept looking back at him, her dark eyes filled with worry and something else, hope, maybe, or trust that somehow they would both be okay. An hour later, as they sat in the hospital waiting room, Sophia curled against his uninjured side while doctors finished treating his wound. Marcus realized something had fundamentally changed. The empty house and silent days that had driven him to that highway 3 weeks ago no longer seemed like his only option. "What happens now?" Sophia asked quietly. Marcus looked down at her, this fierce little survivor who had given him purpose again. "Now we figure out what comes next, together." Outside, dawn was breaking over a world that suddenly felt full of possibilities.